Welcome in, everyone. It is incredibly good to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
I am so thrilled you're here because we are embarking on a deep dive today that touches on something universally relatable.
No matter who you are or what you do.
Exactly. No matter who you are, what you do for a living, or where you are listening from right now. We are looking directly at the space you choose to wake up in every single morning.
The environment you literally surround yourself with.
Right. And the mission for this deep dive is to dissect a truly fascinating transcript we've acquired. It's actually from a C2 Advanced English Listening Practice source, and it's titled Urban Hustle versus Rural Tranquility.
And just to jump in for a little context, if you aren't familiar with language testing, a C2 level essentially means this source material is designed to test the absolute highest near-native level of language fluency.
So it's not just basic vocabulary.
Right. It doesn't just deal with basic words. It deals with really complex, nuanced arguments and cultural idioms, which is precisely what makes it such a rich vein of information to tap into for us.
Because it strips away a lot of the superficial arguments we usually hear.
Exactly. It gets right to the core of how our environments actively shape our everyday realities. We aren't just talking about real estate preferences here. By analyzing the specific nuances, the distinct pros and the inevitable cons of these different environments, we uncover some profound insights into human psychology, macroeconomics, and sociology.
So we are setting the stage for a massive overarching dichotomy here. We are contrasting two diametrically opposed ways of life to try and answer an age-old question: which of these environments actually offers a superior quality of life?
The ultimate debate.
The ultimate debate.
Yeah.
And the source text sets this up brilliantly. It introduces us to this dialogue between two individuals. One is a staunch advocate for the countryside, and the other is a quintessential dyed-in-the-wool city dweller.
And there's that highly amusing anecdote right at the start.
Yes, I absolutely have to mention this to grab your attention because it perfectly encapsulates the irony of this whole debate. The rooster incident.
The famous rooster incident.
So the city-dwelling character in the source material, right? This is a guy who usually insists on having a specialty coffee shop within a 50-meter radius of his apartment at all times.
Essential for survival.
Right. So he returns from a brief trip out to the country, and his counterpart immediately notices that he is exuding this surprising Zen aura.
His stress is just entirely gone.
He is incredibly grounded.
Yeah.
And the hilarious part is he achieved this state of profound relaxation despite the fact that he was woken up at the crack of dawn every single day by a rooster absolutely screaming its head off outside his window.
It's a fantastic opening to the text because it perfectly grounds the conversation we are about to have. What's fascinating here is the irony of the auditory environment.
Because roosters are not quiet.
No, they are incredibly loud. You have a disruptive noise, but it exists within a broader context of absolute tranquility. The text immediately acknowledges a crucial caveat right off the bat, which is that this debate between the city and the country is fiercely subjective.
Highly subjective.
It ultimately boils down to individual priorities. What lowers cortisol for one person might spike it for another.
Which is why, before we really get into the weeds of this, I want you, the listener, to take a second and reflect on your own current living situation.
Take a look around.
Yeah, look out your window right now or think about your commute this morning. Are you surrounded by the relentless kinetic activity of a global powerhouse? Or are you breathing in the unpolluted air of the countryside?
Keep your own environment in mind as we unpack this.
Because we are starting right in the thick of it. Let's look at the highest concentration of human activity, the metropolis.
And we should define what we mean by that using the exact lens provided by our source.
We aren't talking about a large town with a busy main street.
No, we are looking at densely populated metropolitan hubs. Places characterized by ubiquitous skyscrapers, relentless 24/7 activity, and a massive continuous influx of people.
The text explicitly cites the heavy hitters, right?
Global powerhouses.
Yeah.
New York, London, Tokyo, Paris.
These are places where the sheer scale of human endeavor is just staggering. And the defining characteristic of these spaces, as the source points out immediately, is their unparalleled accessibility and infrastructure.
The sheer convenience of it all.
Think of the city like an all-inclusive resort. But instead of piña coladas by the pool, it's an all-inclusive resort for your everyday needs, your ambitions, and your sudden whims.
That's a very apt analogy. The infrastructure is designed to cater to human desire with as little friction as possible.
The text highlights some brilliant specific examples of this. If you have a midnight craving for sushi, your craving is instantly satisfied.
There is an establishment open, and someone will probably deliver it to your door in 20 minutes.
Or, if you need caffeine,
Yeah.
you have that artisanal coffee shop within a 50-meter radius. But it goes way beyond food and drink.
Right. We were talking about having world-class healthcare facilities, top-tier financial institutions, and cutting-edge fitness centers, all located essentially within walking distance from your front door.
Let's dig into the why of that convenience. Why does having a gym, a bank, and a hospital within a 5-block radius matter so much to the human psyche?
Well, the off-the-charts convenience factor means that you are not squandering hours of your day commuting just to run basic life errands. This density allows for a highly optimized daily routine.
It's fast-paced.
Yes, it is incredibly fast-paced. But from a purely logistical standpoint, the friction of daily life is reduced to almost zero. The time it takes to procure food, see a doctor, deposit a check, go to the gym, it's minimized.
You are buying back your own time through the sheer density of the infrastructure around you.
Exactly.
But are people actually using that saved time to relax? Because it feels like when you live in a place like New York or Tokyo, what you do with that optimized time is where the city becomes this massive cultural and gastronomic melting pot.
It's inexhaustible.
The source explores the staggering diversity of these environments. You have the ability to sample truly authentic global cuisine on any given Tuesday.
You don't have to wait for a special occasion or a vacation.
No, the entire world is brought to your street corner.
And it's not just the culinary access, it's the human access. The text emphasizes how intellectually stimulating it is to constantly interact with individuals from vastly diverse demographic and cultural backgrounds.
It's that massive influx of people.
Right. When you have people from all over the globe crammed into a dense hub, it naturally generates an inexhaustible array of entertainment and cultural options. It creates what economists might call agglomeration benefits, but socially. It's a friction of ideas.
Inexhaustible is the perfect word for it. The source points out that in these global powerhouses, boredom is simply not an option. You are completely spoiled for choice.
You want to see an avant-garde art exhibition.
It's 3 blocks away.
A Broadway-caliber theatrical performance.
It's a subway stop away.
Some obscure indie music festival that caters to an incredibly niche genre.
It's happening this weekend in a warehouse downtown. The city provides a stage for absolutely every human interest, no matter how obscure.
But we have to look at the underlying foundation that makes all of this avant-garde art and midnight sushi possible.
None of that exists in a vacuum.
No, it requires capital. Cities, as the source explicitly states, are the engines of the economy. The concentration of wealth, capital, and industry is unparalleled.
So if you are a listener who is highly ambitious, what does plugging into that economic engine actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
It means that the city represents the ultimate concentration of multinational corporations, innovative startups, and diverse booming industries. If you are actively looking to climb the corporate ladder, this concentration of lucrative career trajectories makes the city your ultimate proving ground.
It's a magnet.
A massive magnet. The sheer proximity to other ambitious individuals and massive companies creates networking and professional opportunities that simply do not exist in less dense environments. You don't just go to the city for the sushi.
You go to the city to plug yourself into that momentum.
You are standing in the middle of the river of capital.
It's the ultimate professional launch pad. You bump into someone at that local coffee shop, and suddenly you have a job interview at a tech startup. That serendipity is engineered by the density.
It's designed for it.
But here is where we need to play devil's advocate, because the city is far from a utopia.
Very far.
And the text does not shy away from this at all. It introduces this very evocative concept of the concrete jungle, which brings us to the very real, very heavy toll of the urban hustle.
We have to examine the physical and psychological constraints of existing in a global powerhouse.
Because the very density that provides the opportunity also creates immense friction.
Let's look at those physical constraints first, because the source paints a very stark, chronically overcrowded reality.
We are talking about severe claustrophobia and gridlock.
Imagine the public transit systems during rush hour.
The text uses that classic imagery, people packed together like sardines.
Your personal space is completely eliminated.
You are physically pressed against strangers just trying to get to work. And if you choose to avoid the subway and stay above ground,
You are dealing with agonizing gridlock.
You can find yourself completely stationary, sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic for nearly an hour, just trying to traverse a few kilometers. The friction of daily life might be low when you're walking to the coffee shop, but the friction of actual movement across the city is immense.
And that physical friction is accompanied by a massive environmental burden. Let's take a clinical look at the environmental stressors mentioned in the source material.
Starting with what is arguably the most insidious, yet often overlooked, factor noise pollution.
Blaring sirens, relentless construction, the constant cacophony of traffic.
It's just a wall of sound.
The text points out that a city never truly sleeps. And while that sounds romantic in a song, biologically, it is a nightmare.
It really is.
This relentless ambient noise severely disrupts the human circadian rhythm. Your body is biologically wired through thousands of years of evolution to require periods of profound silence and darkness for restorative rest.
And the concrete jungle simply refuses to provide that.
Your brain is constantly processing that ambient noise, constantly on low-level alert. Furthermore, we have to address the deteriorating air quality.
The smog.
Yes, the smog and the continuous emissions from that bumper-to-bumper traffic aren't just visually unpleasant. The source highlights them as a legitimate, pressing public health concern.
You are breathing in the exhaust of that economic engine every single day.
So you have this physiological baseline of stress. Your brain is hearing sirens, your lungs are processing smog, you're packed in a subway car.
And that toll bleeds directly into the psychological reality of the city. The text unpacks this by introducing the concept of the rat race.
The tempo of urban life is described as frenetic.
Everyone around you is perpetually in a rush. Everyone is chronically time poor.
That's the trap we hinted at earlier. You might be saving time on your grocery run because the store is downstairs, but the societal expectation in these hubs is that you reinvest every minute of that saved time into the hustle.
Exactly. You didn't save an hour on a commute so you could read a book. You saved an hour so you could work an extra hour.
It creates an environment ripe for severe economic and emotional burnout.
If you do not proactively carve out downtime, if you do not forcefully schedule your own rest and defend it fiercely, the city will consume all your energy.
The kinetic energy is a double-edged sword. And compounding this psychological toll is the harsh economic reality of the metropolis.
Oh, the astronomical cost of living. This is where the dream hits a wall for a lot of people.
The source material provides a very stark, very relatable example of this economic pressure. It details the reality of an unforgiving real estate market where individuals are shelling out half of their monthly salary for a cramped studio apartment that is scarcely larger than a closet.
Half your salary for a closet.
It's absurd when you say it out loud.
You are working yourself to the bone in the rat race, dealing with the noise and the smog, just to hand over 50% of your income to a landlord for a space where you can touch both walls at the same time.
When you look at it that way, it becomes a very clear, very calculated transaction.
In the city, you are fundamentally trading space and tranquility for opportunity and excitement.
You are signing a social contract that says, I will accept the claustrophobia, the noise pollution, and the exorbitant rent entirely in exchange for the midnight sushi, the avant-garde art, and the lucrative career trajectory.
It is a high-stakes trade-off.
And it's a trade-off that inevitably leads many people to look in the exact opposite direction. When the burnout hits the opposite extreme, suddenly looks incredibly appealing.
Which brings us out of the concrete jungle and into the pastoral landscape. We are moving from the metropolis to out in the sticks.
And the source defines this rural landscape beautifully.
We are trading those ubiquitous skyscrapers for quaint villages and agrarian landscapes.
Undulating hills, dense woodlands.
Unspoiled nature that is blissfully entirely far removed from urban sprawl.
And the immediate benefits of this shift, according to the text, are deeply physiological and psychological.
We talked about the deteriorating air quality and the smog in the city. The source contrasts this by describing the air in the countryside as medicinal.
Unadulterated crisp air. Stepping out of a dense urban environment and pulling that air into your lungs is described almost as a physical reset.
And the contrast in the soundtrack is incredible. We go from the blaring sirens and the relentless construction to a rural soundtrack consisting of rustling foliage and native wildlife.
Which brings us back to our friend with the vociferous rooster.
Right, our rooster.
Yes, a rooster might wake you up at dawn, but the broader auditory environment is one of profound tranquility. There is no low-level hum of a million cars.
And the text notes the biological response to this profound silence, which is plummeting cortisol levels.
Cortisol being the primary stress hormone. When you remove the constant sensory bombardment of the city, the environment literally lowers your biological stress.
It signals to your nervous system that you are safe.
The text emphasizes that this does absolute wonders for mental health.
And when your nervous system calms down, this naturally leads to a massive shift in your overall wavelength. The pace of life becomes significantly more leisurely.
I love the contrast the source material draws here regarding community and how people actually interact with one another.
Think about the city. Human interaction is often just a fleeting nod from a fellow city dweller as they are actively sprinting to catch the subway before the doors close.
You are surrounded by millions of people, but you are effectively anonymous.
Contrast that with a rural environment where neighbors actually pause their day to engage in meaningful conversation.
The sociological benefits of this slower pace are profound. The text describes a tight-knit environment where genuine camaraderie flourishes.
Because there are fewer people, and because the pace of life allows for it, people have the time and the inclination to actively look out for one another.
You build deep reciprocal relationships. And structurally, the text notes that this environment boasts crime rates that are statistically negligible compared to the urban centers.
You are trading the anonymity and the sheer volume of the city for the visibility, the safety, and the support of a true community.
And let's not ignore the massive economic relief this pastoral shift provides.
We were just talking about shelling out half your salary for a closet-sized studio apartment.
In the country, the source points out that getting a real foothold on the property ladder is actually a feasible reality for normal people.
The financial comparison the text makes is staggering. You can acquire a substantial property complete with extensive acreage for the equivalent of a modest deposit on a city apartment.
You are reclaiming physical space. You aren't just buying a place to sleep, you are buying land.
You are buying distance from your neighbors.
Exactly. And the text adds this wonderful detail about the deeply rewarding aspect of using that space.
Cultivating your own produce.
Right. You have the land, you have the unpolluted medicinal air, and you have the time to actually engage with the earth.
You can plant a garden. You can grow your own food. It sounds idyllic.
It sounds like a perfect healing sanctuary away from the madness of the modern world.
It really does. But this raises an incredibly important question.
If it is so idyllic, if it is so medicinal and affordable, why isn't everyone living there?
Why do cities even exist if the country is this perfect?
We have to take off the rose-tinted glasses. We have to look at the harsh pragmatics of this lifestyle.
Because there is always a catch. And the catch here is the reality of isolation, the pragmatic challenges of the countryside.
Isolation, as the text notes, is truly the operative word here.
It is the defining feature of the environment, for better or worse.
We must examine the severe implications of geographic detachment, the very thing that provides the tranquility being blissfully far removed from urban sprawl, also creates incredibly cumbersome logistics for basic survival.
You aren't walking 50 meters for an artisanal coffee out here.
You aren't getting midnight sushi delivered.
No. The source lays out a very realistic, mundane scenario. You might face a 45-minute drive just to procure basic groceries.
Think about that friction. You've traded the rush hour gridlock of the city for a massive geographic hurdle just to feed yourself.
If you forget milk, it's a 2-hour round trip.
And while a 45-minute drive for a gallon of milk is an inconvenience, the text highlights where this geographic detachment becomes critical.
Access to specialized healthcare in medical emergencies.
In the city, world-class hospitals with leading specialists are within walking distance or a short ambulance ride. Out in the sticks, that geographic detachment could literally be a matter of life and death if you require immediate, highly specialized intervention.
The golden hour in trauma care is entirely eaten up by just trying to get to a facility.
And how are you making that 45-minute drive? Because the source makes it glaringly obvious public transit is an absolute futility.
You cannot rely on a subway or a bus network. Owning a private vehicle is not a luxury in the countryside. It is an absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for survival.
If your car breaks down, you are completely stranded. Furthermore, we have to look at the digital infrastructure, which has become just as vital as physical infrastructure.
The text points out that broadband connectivity in these pristine rural landscapes can be agonizingly erratic.
In an era where many people hope to escape the city by bringing their jobs with them, this erratic internet makes remote work a logistical nightmare.
You can't join a video conference if your connection drops every time the wind blows.
So the physical isolation is compounded by a severe degree of digital isolation.
And that isolation bleeds heavily into the cultural scene, We talked about the city having avant-garde art, obscure indie festivals and Broadway.
In the country, you are fundamentally trading Michelin star restaurants and symphonies for local taverns and town hall meetings.
Now that might sound incredibly charming to a burnt-out executive looking to decompress, but the source makes a vital point. For adolescents in particular, this environment can feel incredibly culturally stagnant.
They are cut off from the sheer diversity, the friction of ideas, and the inexhaustible entertainment of the metropolis.
There's a reason teenagers in small towns constantly complain about being bored.
Which serves as a perfect pivot to what the source identifies as the primary catalyst for the rural exodus.
Why do young people inevitably leave these quaint villages?
It comes down to the professional landscape. The job market in a rural setting is notoriously limited.
It is heavily skewed toward agriculture, local retail, or specific local trades.
If you are a young person pursuing a highly specialized or corporate career, if you want to be an investment banker, an aerospace engineer, or a specialized software developer, your prospects in the countryside are incredibly grim.
Unless, of course, you're one of the fortunate few for whom remote work is fully viable and you miraculously manage to secure decent broadband.
The economic engine simply isn't there to support massive career ambition.
So we are left with these two extreme poles.
On one hand, you have the frantic, opportunity-rich, culturally diverse, but claustrophobic and exhausting city.
On the other hand, you have the tranquil, spacious, community-oriented, but isolated and economically limited countryside.
It feels like you have to choose between your career and your sanity.
But the source material doesn't leave us hanging there. It brings us to the compromise. How do people actually navigate this dichotomy?
The source does a brilliant job of synthesizing this debate by reiterating the absolute subjectivity of it all.
The ideal choice isn't universally objective.
It is entirely a matter of prioritizing what you value most at a highly specific juncture in your life. Human needs are not static. They are deeply dynamic.
At one point in your life, typically in your 20s or 30s, you might genuinely thrive on the kinetic energy, the hustle, and the friction of the city.
You need the rat race to build your foundation.
At another juncture, perhaps later in life, you might desperately crave the restorative pacing and the unpolluted air of the pastoral landscape.
And the text outlines some fascinating ways people try to hack this system, seeking what it calls the best of both worlds.
It presents two ultimate compromises that people strive for. The first is for the ambitious professional who still absolutely needs that economic engine of the city to fuel their career.
The strategy is to retain a city foothold. Maybe you rent a smaller apartment or a studio in the metropolis for the work week.
But you acquire a rural pied-à-terre.
A little weekend sanctuary out in the sticks, specifically designed to let your cortisol levels plummet.
You go there on Friday evening to decompress from the rat race, breathe the medicinal air, and then you dive back into the concrete jungle on Monday morning.
It's treating the city as a workspace and the country as a recovery ward.
The second compromise the text offers is what it calls the happy medium golden years retreat.
This is for the individual who is perhaps stepping back from the fierce corporate climb. They retreat to a semi-rural setting.
It's not a cabin in the deep woods, isolated from society.
It's a town that has just enough amenities to be comfortable so you aren't driving 45 minutes for basic groceries. Maybe there's a local clinic and a decent cafe, but it remains small enough to foster that vital community spirit and camaraderie.
And most importantly, it completely, entirely eliminates the soul-crushing daily commute to the urban core.
It's the ultimate balancing act. You get the space and the community, but you don't completely sever ties with civilization.
Now, because this text is fundamentally an advanced English learning tool, remember, this is a C2 level source. It takes a moment to review the specific language we use to describe these boundaries.
And I think this is so cool how our language instinctively reflects these extreme environmental realities.
Yes, the C2 level idioms the text highlights are incredibly telling. They perfectly encapsulate the psychological realities of these lifestyles.
When we talk about the relentless, hyper-competitive, time-poor reality of the city, we use the idiom, the rat race.
It evokes a maze, a sense of endless running without actually reaching a destination, just competing for scraps of cheese.
And the physical environment of the city is universally referred to as the concrete jungle.
I love that imagery.
Yeah.
It implies a place that is wild, unforgiving, predatory even, but entirely man-made.
You have to have street smarts to survive it, just like a real jungle.
Conversely, to articulate extreme rural detachment, we use phrases like out in the sticks or in the middle of nowhere.
Notice how these phrases subtly imply a distance from the center of importance. Nowhere suggests a lack of relevance, reflecting that economic and cultural detachment we discussed.
It's peaceful, but it's disconnected from the main artery of human progress.
And finally, the idiom, the best of both worlds to describe that coveted compromise.
The text notes that utilizing these concepts doesn't just make a non-native speaker sound fluent. It actually helps all of us cognitively articulate our own environmental boundaries and desires.
When you say you need a break from the rat race, you are diagnosing a specific psychological toll.
Which brings us back inevitably to the listener.
Exactly. We've unpacked the grand trade-offs.
The bustling metropolis with its midnight sushi avant-garde art and severe burnout versus the pastoral tranquility with its medicinal air, tight-knit community, and agonizingly erratic broadband.
So I will ask you directly one more time, are you a quintessential city dweller?
Does the kinetic energy fuel you? Or are you, at heart, a rural soul craving the quiet?
Does your current residence, the place you are sitting in or commuting through right now, actually align with your temperament?
It's a crucial self-assessment.
And if we look closely at the source material, if we read between the lines of this great debate, it leaves us with a lingering, almost troubling implication.
The text highlights how our priorities inevitably shift depending on our specific juncture in life.
This biological and psychological shifting often drives ambitious youth headlong into the city to climb the ladder and older individuals out toward the quiet of the country to find that happy medium.
This raises a profoundly important question for us to consider.
If our ideal environment shifts so drastically as we age and our physiological needs change, are the very cities we build to be our grand engines of the economy fundamentally hostile to the entirety of the human lifespan?
By optimizing for maximum kinetic energy, relentless hustle, and zero friction for ambition, are we designing urban spaces meant only for a single highly energetic phase of our lives, effectively pushing out anyone who requires a restorative pace?
It's an incredible thought.
Wow. That is an incredibly powerful thought to leave off on. Our greatest city is only built for one chapter of our lives. Is the metropolis inherently anti-aging?
It's something to think about.
I want you to really mull that over today as you navigate your own environment, whether you are currently navigating the concrete jungle or relaxing out in the sticks.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking closely at the spaces you inhabit, and we will catch you on the next one.
Close your eyes for a second.
Well, unless you're driving.
Right, yeah, unless you are driving or operating heavy machinery. Please keep them wide open if you are.
Definitely.
But if you can, I want you to picture two completely opposite extremes of human existence. On one side, you've got this, neon-lit, chaotic metropolis. Think Tokyo, Manhattan, London.
Yeah, loud, fast.
Exactly. It's loud, it's fast, and the streets are practically humming with this undeniable electric kinetic energy. People are shoulder to shoulder, towering skyscrapers are blocking out the sun, and the pulse of the global economy is just vibrating through the concrete right beneath your feet. You step outside, and you are instantly swallowed by the sheer mass of humanity.
It's a sensory overload in the best and sometimes worst possible way.
Oh, absolutely. Now, wipe that slate completely clean. Take a mental eraser to those skyscrapers.
Okay, erased it.
On the other side of the spectrum, picture an isolated cabin. It's tucked deep into the woods, maybe somewhere way up in the Rockies or the Alps.
Sounds peaceful.
Right. There is absolute pin-drop silence, save for the wind rattling through the pine trees. You've got zero neighbor, zero traffic, and a pace of life that is so incredibly slow and deliberate, it almost feels like time itself has just decided to take a nap.
I can picture it.
So those are the two absolute poles of human habitation, total chaos and total isolation. But here's the thing we're unpacking today. Where do most of us actually live? And maybe more importantly, where do most of us aspire to live?
It's a brilliant framing because it highlights a binary choice that almost none of us actually make in the real world.
Yeah.
Very few people truly want to be entirely off the grid, chopping their own firewood in absolute solitude.
Yeah, I definitely don't.
Right, just as very few people want to live their entire lives in a shoebox apartment above a screaming subway grate. Most of us exist, or at least we're desperately striving to exist in that vast, incredibly complicated gray area between the neon metropolis and the isolated cabin. And that massive shifting middle ground is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
And we've got a really fascinating framework to guide us through this today. We're pulling insights from a program designed around the concept of the middle ground, suburbia, and the remote work revolution.
Yes.
Now, what makes our jumping off point today so unique is that the original material we're analyzing wasn't just a standard sociology paper. It was actually designed as a C2 advanced English learning program.
Which is a crucial detail to understand.
Yeah.
For anyone not familiar with the CEFR language framework, C2 isn't just about knowing how to order a coffee or ask for directions.
No, not at all.
C2 is mastery. It's near native fluency. When a curriculum is designed at the C2 level, it's engineered to use highly sophisticated, deeply nuanced vocabulary to discuss incredibly complex abstract concepts.
Right.
It's the language of diplomacy, high-level academia, and deep sociological critique.
So we aren't just looking at the logistics of moving trucks and mortgage rates today. We're essentially taking a masterclass in both the sociology of human migration and specific linguistics we use to define it. Our mission today, for you, the listener, is to thoroughly unpack this evolving middle ground. We're going to put a magnifying glass over the realities of suburban living, the explosive evolution of these new commuter towns, and the massive cultural ripple effects brought on by the remote work revolution. And we're going to dissect the precise language we use to make sense of these huge geographical shifts.
We're really looking at the underlying mechanics here. Why do people pack up their lives and move? How do those movements fundamentally alter the physical and cultural spaces they arrive in?
Yeah.
And what are the deep, often unexamined psychological motivations driving these demographic tidal waves?
So let's jump right into the deepest part of that middle ground, suburbia.
Let's do it.
The framework we're exploring kicks things off by looking at the traditional suburban lifestyle, and it uses this perfect phrase. It calls suburbia a double-edged sword.
A very apt description.
And honestly, if you're sitting there listening to this from your own suburban living room, looking out at a cul-de-sac, you probably know exactly what that blade feels like.
Yeah.
It's framed as the ultimate compromise. On paper, it's the dream, right?
Right.
Let's look at the immediate perks highlighted in the text. You get the manicured lawn, you get the extra square footage, a dedicated home office, maybe a guest room. You get access to highly rated public school districts.
All very desirable things.
And the real kicker, you get all of this without completely severing your ties to the economic pulse of the nearby city.
It's the pursuit of having it all. But let's actually break down what those perks represent, because they speak to very deeply ingrained human desires.
Let's hear it.
Take the manicured lawn, for example. We think of it as just grass, but psychologically, it's so much more. A lawn is buffer zone.
A buffer zone?
Yes. It represents a desire for personal dominion, for strict control over your immediate environment. It provides a sense of peace and order that is fundamentally impossible to achieve when you share a wall with neighbors on a busy, unpredictable city block.
It's your own little private kingdom. You decide who crosses the moat.
Exactly. You control the perimeter. And the square footage argument is essentially about expansion and potential. It's about having the literal room to breathe, to accumulate, and to grow a family without feeling suffocated.
Right.
And then the focus on highly rated school districts. That taps into the most foundational biological and social desire we have.
Securing a competitive advantage for the next generation.
Precisely. All of these forces are incredibly powerful. Conceptually, the suburb was engineered to give you the safety, the quiet, and the space of that isolated cabin extreme, while keeping you tethered to the high-paying jobs and economic engine of the neon metropolis extreme.
And you knew there was a but coming.
There's always a but.
This is where the double-edged nature of that sword really starts swinging. Because the downside of this engineered utopia is its overwhelming homogeneity. The environment is described in the text as this quintessential suburban sprawl, featuring endless rows of cookie-cutter houses. And there's this profound observation that these environments often end up feeling incredibly sterile. But I want to push on that for a second.
Go ahead.
Why is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, if a neighborhood is perfectly planned, safe, clean, and efficient, why does our brain suddenly tag it as sterile or negative?
It's a really perceptive question, and it comes down to the friction between how things are built versus how human culture naturally evolves.
Okay, break that down.
Think about the contrast between a planned suburban subdivision and an organic historical city center. A vibrant city possesses a chaotic, organic culture and an architectural diversity that only happens over centuries. What makes a city visually and culturally stimulating? It's the physical evidence of time and conflict.
Right. It's walking down a street and seeing a 200-year-old Gothic church smashed right up against a modern glass-fronted tech startup office.
Exactly.
And across the street, there's a tiny family-owned bodega that's been there for 4 generations right next to a trendy new vegan bakery. It's a mess, but it's a beautiful mess.
That's exactly it. It's a chaotic charm. A city grows like a forest. It's a living organism. It adapts, it layers over itself, it scars, it heals. It contains multitudes of history and millions of individual, uncoordinated decisions stacked on top of one another.
And the suburb.
A traditional suburb is the exact opposite of a forest. It's a monoculture crop. It's usually built in a single, massive phase. A developer clears a massive plot of former farmland, and hundreds of identical or barely distinguishable houses are dropped into place simultaneously.
Hence the term cookie cutter. It's literal mass production applied to human habitation.
Precisely. And look, we can't deny the utility of that. Mass production is what makes the housing relatively affordable and efficient to construct at scale. But the psychological result of living inside a mass-produced environment is a profound sense of homogenization.
Yeah.
It feels sterile because it's completely stripped of the friction, the history, and the happy accidents that create authentic culture. You are explicitly trading that rich, unpredictable, chaotic history for absolute, soothing predictability.
And you really feel that trade-off the exact second you drive past the city limits. There's a point made in the source here that I think is going to hit incredibly close to home for anyone who's made this migration.
The walkability issue.
Yes. The concept of a walkable neighborhood basically evaporates into thin air. You trade that chaotic charm we're talking about for a landscape dominated by strip malls and massive chain restaurants.
It's a jarring shift.
Let's really visualize this difference. If you live in an apartment in a dense city, you walk out your front door, and within 5 minutes on foot, you might pass 3 independent coffee shops, a dry cleaner, a subway station, a public park, and maybe 200 different people.
Your world is immediately accessible at a human scale.
Exactly. Now, transplant yourself to that beautiful suburban house with the manicured lawn. You walk out your front door, you look left, you look right. What can you actually walk to?
In a vast majority of North American suburbs, the answer is absolutely nothing.
Nothing but more houses.
Right. And this brings us to one of the most transformative elements of the middle ground, the inextricable, absolute dependence on the personal automobile.
Yeah.
You aren't just changing your zip code, you are fundamentally changing your relationship with the physical world.
Yeah.
You are trading a public subway commute for private gridlock on a multi-lane highway.
I remember visiting a friend who had just moved to a newly built suburb in Texas. We wanted to grab a gallon of milk. The grocery store was technically only a mile away. I suggested we walk.
I bet he laughed at you.
He looked at me like I was insane.
Yeah.
To get there on foot, we would have had to navigate a winding cul-de-sac, walk along the shoulder of a feeder road with no sidewalk, and then play Frogger across a 6-lane arterial highway where cars were going 55 miles an hour.
That's terrifying.
It wasn't just inconvenient, the infrastructure was actively hostile to the human body.
That hostility is by design.
Yeah.
Or rather, it's the byproduct of a design solely focused on the automobile.
Yeah.
And we have to consider how the physical space we inhabit and the specific ways we are forced to move through it dictates our culture and our daily experience.
It has to. Absolutely.
In a walkable city, your commute involves sharing space. You are physically surrounded by your fellow citizens on the train or the sidewalk. You're exposed to different classes, different languages, different realities. But in the quintessential suburban sprawl, your commute isolates you in a climate-controlled metal box.
It totally rewires your brain. You go from sharing a collective public infrastructure to fiercely defending your personal real estate in a traffic jam.
That's a great way to put it.
Every other human being on the road isn't a neighbor. They are an obstacle between you and your driveway.
It creates a highly defensive posture toward the world. And the destination changes right along with the journey. When a neighborhood isn't built for walking, local businesses absolutely cannot survive on foot traffic. They need cars. Cars require massive amounts of storage space parking lots. Those parking lots require massive, expensive plots of land. This directly leads to the creation of the strip mall and the big box store. Because these retail footprints are so astronomically expensive to lease and operate, small independent ventures get priced out immediately. Only massive corporate chains can afford the overhead.
So it reinforces that loop of homogenization. You traded the organic, walkable, local culture for sterile drive-through convenience. So it really forces you to ask yourself, how much does your neighborhood's physical layout shape who you interact with? Do you actually talk to your neighbors, or do you just give them a polite little wave through the tinted window of your SUV as the garage door closes?
That is a wildly uncomfortable question, but it's so necessary.
Because people didn't just stop at building those traditional adjacent suburbs. The evolution of housing pushed even further out. Our framework transitions from the standard suburban sprawl to something slightly different: the rise of commuter towns, or exurbs.
Right.
Now, these are defined as satellite towns that are situated a really significant distance from the urban core. But here's the magic trick. They are directly tethered to the city by high-speed rail or advanced commuter train lines.
And that's a vital distinction to make. A traditional suburb usually bleeds directly out of the city limits. It's part of a continuous, unbroken wave of concrete and housing. An exurb, on the other hand, might be a completely separate, historically rural, genuinely quaint small town that is separated from the metropolis by 30 or 40 miles of open farmland or protected green space.
Okay, so it has its own history.
Exactly. It existed independently before the city ever reached it. However, because of advancements in infrastructure specifically, that high-speed rail link, the time it takes to travel between this distant, quiet town and the chaotic city center is drastically slashed.
So time, rather than physical mileage, becomes the only metric that matters.
Precisely. Yeah. If a town is 50 miles away, that used to mean a soul-crushing 2-hour drive each way. Unlivable. But if a new commuter rail line turns that into a smooth 35-minute train ride where you can open your laptop and drink your coffee,
Game changer.
suddenly that historic little town becomes a highly viable, incredibly attractive option for a professional working in the city's financial district.
Which turns these exurbs into absolute gold mines. They become incredibly lucrative real estate hotspots. People are desperate for the authentic quaintness of a separate town, the historic main street, the local diner, the community feel, but they still need to draw that massive city salary.
Right.
But bringing those two things together creates a massive, grinding sociological friction point. This brings us to a really heavy issue presented in the text: gentrification. And I want to look closely at how this cause and effect chain reaction works, because it's basically an unstoppable economic domino effect.
It is profound, and it happens with brutal efficiency. Let's trace the exact steps of this migration pattern.
Walk us through it.
Step 1. Affluent city dwellers decide they are burned out. They want out of the chaotic metropolis, but they absolutely need to maintain their access to the corporate headquarters. They look at a map, they trace the high-speed rail lines outward, and they mass migrate to these quaint, peripheral towns.
Okay.
Step 2. This mass migration doesn't just bring people. It brings a tsunami of urban capital into a previously rural, self-sustaining economy.
Right. You've got people bringing six-figure city salaries into a small-town real estate market that was built around local wages. But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Please do.
If a sleepy, maybe slightly decaying small town suddenly gets a high-speed rail stop and thousands of wealthy city workers move in, isn't that inherently good? Doesn't the local diner suddenly have a line out the door? Don't property values go up? Isn't an injection of capital exactly what struggling towns beg for?
On a macroeconomic spreadsheet, yes. The town's GDP looks fantastic. But let's look at how that money actually behaves on the ground, because it creates a devastating localized inflation. Let's use a simple example: local housing. When urban buyers flood the market, they are perfectly willing and able to pay double the asking price for a quaint Victorian home, because compared to a tiny apartment in the city, it still feels like a massive bargain to them. The local real estate market immediately adjusts to capture this new, deeper pool of wealth. The cost of living skyrockets to exorbitant levels almost overnight.
And that's where the domino falls on the generational inhabitants. The people whose families might have lived in this town for 60, 100 years, long before the train station was ever built.
Precisely. The property values go up, which means the property taxes go up. The rent on the commercial spaces on Main Street triples, so the local diner has to double the price of a hamburger just to keep the lights on. The cost of a cup of coffee goes up.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the local school teacher, the mechanic, the nurse, the people who actually keep the physical town functioning on local wages can no longer afford to live in the town they grew up in. They are abruptly and often permanently priced out of their own communities.
It's an economic eviction. Which brings up this incredibly tragic paradox that we need to talk about. The source describes it as a classic catch-22.
Right, a catch-22 being a paradoxical situation from which you cannot escape because of contradictory rules. The tragedy of this exurbing catch-22 is that on one hand, the rural economy receives a much-needed, massive injection of capital. The roads get paved, the schools get new computers, the tax base explodes.
Sounds great on paper.
But on the other hand, the demographic makeup and the very soul of the community are irrevocably altered.
It's heartbreaking. The new arrivals move there specifically for the town's idyllic charm, the quirky local shops, the tight-knit community, the slow pace. But their very presence, their overwhelming wealth, and their sheer numbers actively destroy those exact elements.
Yes.
They transform the historic town into a high-end, manicured satellite of the city, populated entirely by other wealthy commuters.
It's the ultimate paradox of gentrification. You inadvertently destroy the thing you love simply by arriving in large numbers to admire it. The economic boom cannot be untangled from the cultural erasure. And this is something anyone living in one of these towns needs to ponder deeply.
What's that?
Can a community truly survive an economic boom if the ultimate result is the displacement of the very people who built it? If the generational inhabitants are entirely gone and replaced by commuters, is it actually still the same town? Or is it just a brand new demographic wearing the geographic skin of the old town?
Wow. That is a heavy, heavy thought. A brand new demographic wearing the skin of the old town. That perfectly sets the stage for the next massive disruption we're going to explore. We've talked about how cars created the suburbs. We've talked about how high-speed trains created exurbs in commuter towns. But what happens when you take a pair of scissors and cut the tether completely?
Total untethering.
Yes. The paradigm shift brought on by the telecommuting revolution. The text highlights how the pandemic essentially severed the geographical chain, linking an employee to their corporate headquarters.
And this is where we graduate from localized regional shifts to a massive global phenomenon. For the entirety of human history, up until very recently, your physical location was ultimately dictated by how you generated income. You had to be near the farm, near the factory, or near the office.
Right.
Even in an exurb, you still had to be close enough to commute via train a few days a week. The remote work revolution broke that fundamental rule of human geography. It aggressively ushered in the era of the digital nomad.
And the reality of this is staggering. We're talking about white-collar professionals who suddenly had this massive epiphany. They realized they could command a top-tier Silicon Valley salary or a London finance salary while physically residing in a remote coastal village in Portugal or a cabin deep in the Rockies.
Or on a beach in Bali.
Exactly. Think about the sheer economic leverage of that for a second. You are vacuuming up the highest possible tier of urban capital, but you are spending it in a local economy that operates on a tiny fraction of that scale. The geographic limitations of earning potential just vanish into thin air overnight.
It's what's been termed the complete democratization of geography. Suddenly, the entire globe becomes a menu of living options, entirely divorced from where your paycheck originates. You are no longer choosing where to live based on the grueling calculus of commute. You are choosing where to live based purely on lifestyle preference, climate, and hobbies.
Which leads us directly to the explosion of what people call Zoom towns. I absolutely love this term.
It's very descriptive.
These are incredibly picturesque locales, mountain towns, beach communities, desert oases that have experienced a sudden, massive population boom strictly due to an influx of remote workers.
It's exactly like the commuter town gentrification we just talked about, but it's on steroids, and it doesn't even require a train station. People are looking at a map and saying, I like snowboarding, or I want to learn to surf, and they just pack up and go.
It is a remarkable democratization, yes. But we have to apply a very critical lens here. Because when we say geography was democratized, we have to ask, democratized for whom?
Right.
This freedom is exclusively available to a very specific echelon of the workforce, namely white-collar professionals. This hypermobility is a luxury reserved for knowledge workers, people whose daily labor can be digitized, compressed, and transmitted through a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection.
And that leaves an entire hemisphere of the workforce completely locked in place. It creates a profound, largely invisible, but impenetrable divide. It's like having two completely different economic realities occupying the exact same physical space. On one side, you have the knowledge workers who can take their laptops and their high salaries anywhere on Earth.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the local service workers, the people whose physical labor actually builds, maintains, and operates these picturesque locales. Think about the barista making the coffee in that coastal village in Portugal, the ski lift operator in the Rockies, the local nurses, the grocery store clerks, the plumbers.
Yeah.
Their labor is inherently, permanently tied to physical location. They cannot telecommute to fix a pipe or stock a shelf.
So what happens to them when the Zoom town population explodes?
It creates an incredibly dangerous economic pressure cooker. Let's look at the mechanics. 5,000 tech workers move to a quiet mountain town. They bring massive salaries. Housing inventory vanishes, and rent quadruples. Now, the local coffee shop owner is paying triple for their commercial lease.
What?
To survive, they raise the price of a latte to $8. The tech worker gladly pays it. $8 is nothing compared to what they made back in San Francisco. But the barista making the coffee, their wages haven't quadrupled to match a Silicon Valley salary.
Of course not.
They're still making local service wages, but now they are forced to survive in a town that has imported metropolis-level costs of living. They can't afford the $8 latte they are serving, and they certainly can't afford to rent an apartment within 30 miles of the shop.
It's an unsustainable paradox. Every time someone logs onto a video call from a beautiful remote mountain deck, there is an entire physical economy straining underneath them to absorb the impact of their presence.
Precisely.
But let's flip the camera around and look at it from the perspective of the remote worker for a moment. Because this total untethering sparks a really fascinating existential debate mentioned in our source text. If you no longer have to commute to a physical office, does the big city actually lose its potency? Does the metropolis still matter at all?
It's the ultimate modern conflict, ambiance versus ambition. There is a very compelling argument being made today for why someone might easily and permanently leave the city. We have to look at how modern conveniences have completely decentralized culture.
That's a great point.
The question becomes, if I can access world-class entertainment via streaming in 4K and have gourmet artisanal ingredients delivered directly to my doorstep via overnight shipping, do I really still need to pay an exorbitant premium to rent a tiny box in a noisy metropolis?
And for decades, centuries even, the answer was an absolute yes. If you wanted the best culture, the newest movies, the avant-garde theater, the incredible diverse food scene, you had no choice. You had to physically place your body in the epicenter of the city.
You had to be there.
But technology has largely negated that monopoly. You can watch the exact same prestige film premiere on your massive OLED screen in a cabin in the woods as someone sitting in a Manhattan penthouse. You can have the exact same rare Ethiopian coffee beans shipped to your remote beach house. The physical stranglehold the city had on premium, high-end experiences is mostly broken.
Exactly. The access to luxury and culture is no longer gatekept by geography. So, for a growing segment of the population, the answer to whether the city has lost its potency is a resounding yes. They are prioritizing completely different life metrics. We're seeing a massive wave of people who are willing to relocate to environments that prioritize their psychological well-being over geographical convenience.
Seeking out that cabin.
Yes. These are individuals who are actively seeking solace. They want a slower, more deliberate, intentional pace of life. They are looking inward. They are prioritizing mental health, access to nature, peace, and quiet over the relentless, exhausting grind of urban proximity.
And this is why I believe cities will never, ever truly die. There are vital, irreplaceable elements of the metropolis that simply cannot be digitized. There are things you absolutely cannot get delivered by a drone to your doorstep.
Such as?
The biggest one is serendipity, the sheer kinetic energy of city streets. Think about what a serendipitous encounter actually is. You do not have serendipitous encounters sitting in your living room in the woods.
No, you don't.
You don't accidentally bump into a fascinating stranger at a coffee shop, or discover a hidden underground art gallery just because you took a wrong turn, or overhear a snippet of a conversation on the subway that completely shifts your perspective on a problem you've been having.
This is the core dichotomy of modern human motivation that the text explores. You have the people seeking solace and deliberate control on one side, and on the other you have those who are deeply driven by ambition, novelty, and external stimuli.
Yeah.
The city is, at its core, a massive engine for generating external stimuli. It forces human interaction. It crams millions of people into a tight space, and it creates friction. And friction creates heat, and heat creates sparks.
I love that. Heat creates sparks.
You simply cannot replicate the ambiance of a bustling metropolis through a flat screen. No matter how high definition your VR headset is, it cannot simulate the visceral electric feeling of walking down a crowded neon-lit street where a million different complex human lives are intersecting simultaneously.
So it really boils down to a direct challenge to you, the listener. Which camp are you fundamentally in? Because physical location is no longer just a mandate for survival or mere employment. Where you live is now a direct reflection of your intrinsic motivations and your identity.
It's a mirror.
Exactly. Are you seeking solace? Are you looking for that deliberate, quiet pace where you have total control over your environment and your inputs? Or are you chasing that kinetic energy? Do you actively need the ambition, the chaotic networking, the friction of the city to feel fully alive? Because for the first time in history, for a large segment of the population, where you live is a choice about exactly who you want to be.
It's a profound historical shift in how humanity views geography. For thousands of years, geography was destiny. Where you were born dictated what you did. Now, for many, geography is simply an accessory to lifestyle.
Okay, I want to take a slightly different angle on this now, because we can't ignore the fact that the framework we've been using was originally an advanced linguistics tool.
Right, the C2 English program.
We've been throwing around these specific phrases to describe these massive societal shifts, but I think we really need to put these words under a microscope. We need to decode the language of location. Because the words we use don't just passively describe our reality, they actively frame and shape how we understand it.
That's a crucial point regarding linguistic determinism. It's essential to understand that choosing one idiom over another fundamentally alters the listener's perception of the event. The terminology highlighted in our C2 framework reveals fascinating, deep layers of meaning about our modern housing crises and migration patterns.
Let's start with the first one we used, the double-edged sword. We applied this to suburbia. Now, obviously, most people know this means there are pros and cons, but what's the deeper linguistic weight here?
In an advanced context, a double-edged sword isn't just a lazy synonym for good and bad. It implies a deeply interconnected paradox. It describes a situation where the distinct advantages are inextricably linked to significant, often harmful disadvantages.
You can't have one without the other.
You cannot isolate the benefit from the risk. The blade cuts both ways at the exact same time. When you apply it to suburbia, it perfectly captures the trap. The exact mechanism that gives you peace and space, the physical distance from the city, the strictly zoned and planned layout, is the exact same mechanism that causes the painful isolation, the mandatory car dependence, and the lack of organic culture. The advantage directly manufactures the disadvantage.
That is such a sharp way to look at it. You can't have the quiet without the isolation. Okay, what about cookie cutter? We use this adjective to describe suburban housing developments.
Cookie cutter is a brilliantly evocative descriptor. In a literal sense, it refers to a metal tool used to stamp out perfectly identical shapes of dough from a flat sheet. Metaphorically, when we use it to describe architecture or entire communities, it means something has been mass-produced to the absolute extreme, to the point where it lacks any individual characteristics, flaws, or originality.
It's a copy-paste neighborhood.
Right. But linguistically, it carries a heavily pejorative or negative connotation. It implies a soullessness. When you dismiss a neighborhood as cookie cutter, you aren't just making an architectural observation that the roofs match. You are casting a judgment. You are implying that the lifestyle contained within those identical walls might also be mass-produced, entirely predictable, and devoid of that messy, authentic, chaotic charm.
It's a massive cultural critique baked right into a hyphenated word. Okay, the third phrase we leaned on is a phrasal verb, priced out. We used this during the discussion on the heavy friction of commuter town gentrification.
This one is incredibly important because it is a heavily loaded economic and sociological term. To be priced out means that the cost of a vital resource in this context, housing, property taxes, or the general cost of living, has risen so astronomically high that a specific existing demographic is forcibly excluded from participating or surviving in that space. But what's most important linguistically is the passive nature of the construction. You don't price out yourself, you are priced out.
Right, it removes agency. The generational inhabitants didn't actively choose to leave their hometown. They were acted upon by an external force.
Exactly. It denotes a systemic, overpowering external force, the influx of outside urban capital, removing a demographic against their will. It perfectly captures the involuntary, almost violent economic displacement that is inherent in gentrification. It frames the locals as victims of a macroeconomic shift, not as active, willing participants in a real estate market.
It really emphasizes the helplessness of the situation. And finally, there's my absolute favorite idiom we've come across from the text. It's a brilliant, slightly informal British phrase, up sticks.
Yes, to up sticks. Yeah. It means to abruptly, often decisively, leave where you are currently living and move somewhere else, usually far away. The classic example is, tired of the relentless 2-hour commute, she finally decided to up sticks and move to the coast.
I just love the visual imagery of that phrase. It evokes this primal idea of pulling up your wooden tent pegs, breaking down your camp, and just hitting the road. It doesn't sound like a slow, heavily calculated, spreadsheet-driven corporate relocation. It sounds like an emotional, abrupt, intensely lifestyle-driven rebellion.
It does. It implies a breaking point has been reached, followed by a swift reclamation of freedom. And integrating these specific phrases into our vocabulary, truly understanding the inescapable paradox of the double-edged sword, the implied sterility of the cookie cutter, the economic violence of being priced out, and the abrupt, liberating rebellion of upping sticks. It doesn't just make us sound smarter, it sharpens our analytical lens.
It really does.
These words give concrete form and shape to the massive anxieties and the unprecedented freedoms of this modern remote work migration.
And I want to turn this directly over to you listening right now. How do these words apply to your life today? Have you recently hit a breaking point and up sticks? Did the pandemic or a sudden change in your company's remote policy suddenly allow you to break camp and flee to a mountain Zoom town?
Or the opposite.
Right. Or on the flip side, are you currently navigating the painful complexities of a commuter town? Have you watched your quirky local neighborhood homogenize or felt the very real terrifying pressure of being priced out of the place you've always called home? Because these aren't just abstract academic concepts or vocabulary flashcards. This is the visceral reality of how human beings are aggressively rearranging themselves on the map right this very second.
It is arguably the defining demographic and geographical shift of our era. And understanding the language we use to describe it is the first step to understanding our own place within it.
So let's take a deep breath and look back at the incredible winding journey we've taken today. We started by examining the quintessential compromise of suburbia, balancing that deep human desire for manicured lawns and control against the sterile, isolated reality of cookie-cutter homogenization and car dependence.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We explored the dark, complicated side of high-speed rail, mapping out exactly how the massive influx of urban wealth into quaint exurbs creates a devastating catch-22 of gentrification, effectively erasing the idyllic charm it desperately sought to find. We marveled at the sheer democratization of geography brought on by telecommuting, where digital nomads wielding massive city salaries are flooding into picturesque Zoom towns, fundamentally and sometimes painfully altering local economies. And finally, we weighed the ultimate existential choice of our time, prioritizing the psychological solace of a deliberate, quiet pace of life against the irreplaceable, chaotic, kinetic energy and serendipity of the bustling metropolis.
It has been an incredibly comprehensive mapping of the modern middle ground. But before we wrap up, if we take everything we've discussed today, every trend, every migration, every economic pressure point, and project it forward, it raises a final, truly profound question. It forces us to look past the current horizon.
Let's hear it.
We have clearly established that remote work and the desire for solace are currently decentralizing our populations. People are actively choosing to up sticks, fleeing the overwhelming chaos and density of the metropolis, and flooding into these quaint, remote, beautiful Zoom towns in search of space and a deliberate pace of life. But let us extrapolate this trend over a long enough timeline. What happens to those very Zoom towns 50 or 100 years from now?
Oh, wow. I see where you're going with this.
If the constant, unrelenting influx of urban capital, white-collar ambition, and population density continues to pour into these formerly isolated spaces, will they not organically, inevitably evolve? Will the sheer volume of new people eventually require mass transit systems, massive infrastructure overhauls, and dense commercial centers to support them?
They'd have to.
It is entirely possible, perhaps even probable, that by fleeing the city in search of a quiet middle ground, these digital nomads are merely planting the seeds of tomorrow's sprawling urban centers. We have to ask ourselves, are we actually escaping the metropolis, or are we simply resetting the clock, starting the messy human cycle of chaotic, kinetic urbanization all over again in a brand new location?
That is an absolutely brilliant, almost haunting thought to leave on. You pack up your entire life, move to a quiet, pristine beach town to escape the neon city, only to wake up a few decades later and realize you accidentally built a brand new neon city right on top of the sand. That is something to truly mull over next time you look at real estate listings. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the physical spaces around you, keep looking closely at how your environment shapes your daily life and your interactions, and keep exploring the world. We'll be right back here next time to unpack another fascinating topic with you. Take care.